Hey guys, today on Watch with Poppy, we are talking NBC's Deception. This is season 1, episode number 2. Okay, so the title of this episode is Nothing's Free, Little Girl, and there's just a tad bit of foreshadowing in that title, I do believe. So as the episode starts, we are having breakfast with the most dysfunctional family in America, the Bowers family, and everyone's kind of going a little bit crazy. And meanwhile, Joanna's off to work, so she's getting in her car to head off to the city when her car won't start. So Joanna's sitting in her car, it won't start, when all of a sudden this face appears in the window of her car. And it's somebody we don't know, so we're a little freaked out at first, but then we realize she knows him, and his name is Rayburn. It turns out that Rayburn is kind of like a groundskeeper for the family, so Joanna knows him, he remembers her from when she lived there when she was a teenager, so they have like a little happy reunion. And then he tells her, like, your battery's corroded or something like that, and I'll replace it for you. Meanwhile, Julian shows up, because he's gonna go running, and he's like, hey, let me give you a ride to the train station. So she says yes. So then we have this whole, like, J&J moment, that's what I'm gonna call it. Just Joanna and Julian. They're making googly eyes at each other as he takes her to the train station, and he's giving her the eye, and I think she even said something like, why are you looking at me like that? And anytime the two of them talk, you get flashbacks, almost always, of the two of them when they were teenagers. So the two of them are standing there on the train platform looking at each other, and you're flashing back to the two of them as teenagers, and they're in bed together and they're kissing. After he drops Joanna off at the train station, he heads into the city to run, or he's running, and he stops at this newsstand, and there's a guy standing at the newsstand who is reading some sort of like tabloid with his sister on the cover. And the guy, of course, not realizing, makes some comment about, like, look at this slut, like, I'm not surprised she's dead. And of course Julian loses it on this guy, and really that's kind of the beginning of his kind of spiral downward. So throughout the episode we see lots of Julian, like, drinking and just kind of at parties, and you get that he's just really trying to lose himself. Of course, at the end of the first episode we saw Julian throw the ring, that is the ring that made the bruise on Vivian's face, you know, that we see in all of the crime scene photos. We see him throw this ring into the water, and we see him kind of crying. And to me, Julian is a red herring. Like, I'm gonna be so surprised if Julian turns out to be the killer. I think they showed us that because that puts him under suspicion, but at the same time, it's like, they could have just had a fight and he could have hit her, and he could feel extremely guilty now that she's dead. So I don't know, but whatever, Julian's spiraling down, basically. So Joanna gets to work, and the person who she's replacing is there. She's kind of giving her a few last-minute tips on what to do, and then you see Joanna overhear this conversation between Robert's old assistant and Robert. So she goes into Robert's office, and she's kind of protesting a little bit. So it turns out that she left not because she wanted to, but because Robert is sending her away. So, of course, we learn that the two were having an affair, and she's getting promoted now, but at the same time, you get that she's kind of like, look, I want a little more than what you're giving me, and I don't want to leave. And of course, he's just kind of like, look, we've talked about this, and then she makes, you know, a vital mistake. And she tries to be like, look, I've heard things, and I've seen things while I was working here. So she makes a point of kind of reminding him as well that, look, the night that Vivian was killed, you were here working late, and your son called 3 times, and he was really upset. Now, of course, she doesn't say which son it was, which was kind of frustrating, but she kind of like drops this little threat at him. Mistake number 1, basically. So he's just kind of like, whatever, lady, get out of my office. But Joanna kind of oversees that and realizes, okay, what's going on? There's a lot going on here. So now this assistant, now she's upset. So she's just like, I'm not going to be quiet. And so she goes to the house, to Robert's house, and she decides she's going to go tell Sophia, Robert's wife, what has been going on. So she walks in all like, look, Robert and I have been having an affair and this and that. And Sophia is like crazy, but you get that she is like just hard, and like she's just a hard as nails kind of woman. So the best part was she's got her back turned to this lady, and she's like got a drink in her hand, and she's at the desk, and she's all of a sudden you hear this like weeping, right? And you think she's like crying, and she turns around with the drink, and she's just like, is that what you wanted to hear? Like, it was just like, woman, you are like seriously badass. So she's just kind of like, look, don't think that I don't know what's going on with my husband at all times. And it's just like, get out of my house, basically. So this girl is like really shaken because she thought she was really gonna like shake things up. And I think once she does that, Robert realizes, okay, I need to deal with her. So Will and the FBI, right, you know, they're still trying to crack the case. We meet this new FBI guy that's obviously Will's boss or his superior, who basically tells him, look, you need to find some evidence. You need some evidence or we're going to be done here with this whole case. So he gives him 3 days. He says, in 3 days, you need to show me something that's going to make me want to let you guys keep investigating. So Will is really kind of pressuring Joanna a little bit. So first of all, he wants her to find who are the researchers that are working on this cancer drug. And then he's also trying to find out who the mysterious boyfriend is. Who is this guy that was the father of Vivian's unborn child? Then we go on a little family outing with the Bowers. We go to one of Edward's daughter's field hockey games. And of course, when we're at the game, there's going to be some drama. You know, the paparazzi are there and the police and all kinds of stuff. So then one of the other dads there starts to make all kind of like backhanded comments, and he's sitting right in front of the family. So this guy's basically being a jerk, and finally Edward loses it and just starts to just beat the heck out of him. Gets arrested, of course, and sent off to the police station. So Edward's at the police station, and while he's there, Will is there, and this guy that Will's working with, and he was in episode 1, I can't remember his name, but he's kind of pressuring Will and just kind of like, look, this may be the only chance you get to talk to him, you need to question him. So Will goes in and asks him some questions, but remember, at this point, Vivian's death is thought to be like an accidental overdose. So nobody thinks that she's been murdered except for the FBI. And so Edward starts to kind of get this vibe, and he's just basically like, why are you asking me questions about my sister? And he's also smart, and so he's just kind of like, you're not a cop, you're a fed, what are you doing asking questions about my sister? So he doesn't really get much out of Edward. So yeah, let's talk about Edward, right? Because I've decided that he's my new favorite character in Deception. So Edward, I just really wonder about Edward sometimes, if we're not going to get that Edward is a good guy. And I might also be falling in love with the idea that maybe Joanna falls in love with Edward. Screw Julian. At one point, Joanna comes home from work and she hears shooting. So she runs towards the gunfire, and it's Edward, and he's out doing things that rich people do, like shooting little discs as they fly through the air. I can't remember what it's called. So he's like, come shoot with me. So they talk, and of course Edward has been really nothing but rude to her the entire time that she's been at the house. He's just constantly been like, why is she still here? She needs to leave. Which really makes me wonder if he's not secretly in love with her, and that's why he's trying to get rid of her, but that may just be my fantasy. So they had this conversation, and it really humanized Edward. So they talked a little bit about this past murder case that Edward has kind of hanging over his head. So years ago, Edward was accused of raping and killing this girl, and he's always claimed that he was innocent. He just seemed really heartbroken in this conversation, because he says something to her too, like along the lines of like, look, like, do you think that I wanted to work at my dad's company? I wanted to be a politician. You know, I wanted to go off and do these things, and you get that now he can't do that because he's got this like murder hanging over his head, so he can never have the thing he wants. And it just made me wonder, like, maybe that's part of the reason why Edward is so kind of angry. You know, because he feels like his life has been ruined, and he's obviously dealing with divorce and an ex-wife and not being able to see his kids. So I feel like his anger's been a little misunderstood, and I felt like this scene kind of made you want to like him a little bit more. So let's talk about Julian. So, of course, like I said, Julian loses control this whole episode. He kind of spirals down, lots of drinking. At one point, Joanna's at work, and somebody from a hotel calls. So she has to go and get him from this wild party, and security has him, and so she has to go get him, and they're in the car, and they have this little conversation where you get that he feels incredibly guilty about some of the stuff that happened to his sister. So again, they flash back to when they were kids, and we get that he was the one who kind of introduced her to drug use. So they show the two of them kind of using drugs together, and so I think he feels guilty because he thinks my sister was addicted to drugs because of me. And then, you know, they had this little conversation as well where it sounded like he felt guilty, like he had abandoned her at one point, and then Joanna says, like, we both have to deal with that because I feel that same way too, and that's something we'll just have to deal with for the rest of our lives. And then the moment's over and he jumps out of the car to run off to another party. One of the things that we learn in this episode as well is why Joanna and her mother left. And so it turns out that Joanna's mother actually walked in on the two of them in bed together when they were teenagers, and that was a wrap. And Mama was probably like, we're out, basically. And Joanna also has this conversation with Will where they're kind of talking about, you know, why she left, and she says something like, my mom thought I was becoming too much like them, and so she took me away, basically. So we kind of got the backstory of why her and her mom ended up leaving the family, which is a lot of the reason as well why she and Vivian kind of lost their connection with each other. The other thing is the title of the episode, Nothing's Free, Little Girl, you know, was something that her mom said to her. And here's the foreshadowing for that point, right? So Robert decides the family's gonna get together, so the family's all together and they're outside and it's all beautiful. So as Joanna is headed out to the party, Julian is there at the bottom of the stairs waiting for her to kind of walk her out, and the two are talking. They get outside and he says to her, like, look, you're probably gonna be one of those kind of girls who hates stuff like this, but I did it anyway, I bought you a car. So she's just kind of like, what? Like, where's my car? And he's like, it's gone. Look, I bought you a car. And he bought her, like, a nice car, people. I'm talking, like, it was, like, convertible, like, Mercedes he bought her. And she's just kind of like, oh my gosh. But it reminded me, as soon as it happened, it took me back to her mother, what her mother said to her, nothing's free, little girl. So just makes you wonder what she's gonna have to pay for that car. So let's get back to the case. Eventually, Joanna is able to break into Robert's computer. He tells her this really cool story about Edward when he was younger and how he used to call Edward Eddie Spaghetti. And Joanna realizes that that's the password for his computer, and it is. So she's able to find out who the researchers are for this new cancer drug. Just a note here, early in the episode we find out that the guy that Vivian was dating was named Ben. We learned that piece of information from Mia. So Joanna and Mia really kind of connected in this episode, and at one point they're sitting and talking, and she tells Joanna that Vivian was dating a guy named Ben, but that was all she knew. So when Joanna breaks into Robert's computer and gets the name of the researchers on the cancer drug, she's surprised to find that one of them is named Ben. So it turns out that Vivian's boyfriend slash baby daddy is one of the cancer drug researchers. He's the whistleblower, but he's missing. So she gives all that information to Will and he runs with it. Okay, let's talk about the secretary again, because, you know, she tried to get a little saucy and tried to threaten. And so Robert is basically like, I'm gonna take care of it. And meanwhile, the government also is kind of wanting to maybe try to get her to tell them what she knows. And so Will contacts her to kind of be like, hey, we want to talk. And it sounds like, you know, she's going to do that. So she's living with her brother, who is a basketball player. And basically what happens is her brother gets jumped one night in a parking lot and they break his knees. So to her, that's a message that you need to shut up, and that's it. So the next time Will calls her to try to be like, hey, you missed our appointment, she's like, no, I'm good. I'm not going to talk to you. Please stop calling me. So it's obvious to him that, okay, somebody obviously got to her. There was a couple of points at the end that were kind of shockers. One, we learned that it was Robert who sent the guy to go break this kid's knees to send a message to the secretary, and we learned that it was the groundskeeper, Rayburn, that goes and does his dirty work for him. So that totally took me back to the beginning when he told Joanna, once you get on your feet, you get out, don't get too comfortable here. And I mean, I think he was just definitely telling her, like, look at what has happened to me, basically. Like, look what I'm doing now. As a groundskeeper, now I'm breaking kids' knees. So, yeah, plus nothing's free, little girl. We learned that lesson again, basically, from him. Now, the big ender and kind of shocker at the end of the episode is we see this guy, Ben, who's obviously now off in the wind. He's hiding somewhere. And there's a knock on the door of his door, and you're thinking, don't answer the door, you're going to die. And he opens the door, and we see him standing in the door. And who should be standing in the doorway to come see him but Edward? So, yeah, I'm not sure where that's going, but that was kind of the end of the episode. I thought it was a good episode. Like I said, when I watched the Deception pilot, I was kind of like intrigued enough to keep watching, but not completely blown over. I feel like this episode was good, and I feel like this show is getting better. Like, I liked this episode more than I liked the pilot, and next week's episode looks good as well, so I'm hoping that that kind of continues to grow, and the mystery continues to grow. I wonder how long they can drag this out, though, in all reality, because eventually they're going to find out who killed her, so then I wonder what's going to happen next, so I guess we'll see. So that's it, you guys. Thanks so much for checking out this week's kind of recap and review of NBC's Deception. I will be here next week with another Deception recap, but also I do tons of other recaps and reviews of a lot of different TV shows, because I watch a lot of TV, because I like it, so there you go. Check those out, subscribe if you'd like, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.